Hello, and welcome to TuckersTwenty. And you can probably figure out that this means that I'm going to talk about 20 things related to a certain subject, and that subject is public speaking. I've distilled my many years of wisdom into this PowerPoint. Of course, there'd be a lot more I would want to say in a class, but these are the things I want to start the class off with to emphasize as we move towards your presentations and working on those. And if we were in class, we would start this by I'd hand out cards and I'd have everybody write down three things that they remember from COM 1110, which is the fundamentals of speech class that you should have taken. You may have taken it 2 years ago when you were a freshman, or you may have taken it 20 years ago. I don't know, but it's a basic public speaking class that everyone has to have who gets a degree from Dalton State, which I'm glad that we do. And these I get various things, usually related to delivery and thinking about the audience and things like that. But it's interesting for me to see what people remember. And so at this point, you can stop the video and you can kind of think about what three things do I remember. If I had to, when I think of my basic speech class, what three big things come to mind? Might be a good exercise for you, so you can stop and do that. So I'm going to go through 20 principles that are relevant to the both public speaking in general and to this project. And the first is that the primary purpose of communication is to be understood. Some of you may take issue with that. You say, well, isn't it to be persuasive? Isn't it to be effective? Yes, but you can't do that until you're understood. Now, that does not mean to be agreed with. Understanding does not mean agreement. It means that you understand. You are inside the other person's frame of reference. You're using the same words to mean the same things. You have tried to get their meaning, and they have gotten theirs and gotten yours. So, since this particular assignment is an informative speech, it's not a persuasive. We're going to emphasize the sharing of information, the understanding part, and not so much the changing people's part, which would be persuasion. This slide represents why I do what I do. And I firmly believe this. Public speaking is a skill, and because it's a skill, that means that it can be learned. It is not a trait. It is not something you're born with. Some people may be more extroverted by nature and find it easier, but I've known a lot of extroverted people who were not good speakers because they enjoyed being in front of the audience so much they really didn't have much preparation. They were fun to watch, but they weren't necessarily effective in the other way. Then introverted people sometimes over-prepare and they don't really think in terms of the audience as much. So, we do have this basic introversion extroversion thing, but public speaking itself is a skill, and everyone can learn it. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be doing this. Everyone can learn it. We won't all be Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but we can become adequate at it. And it's essential to being an educated citizen in a free society. And I know that most of us think of public speaking primarily as something we do for class, to get through a presentation, but I want to assure you that you are going to have to give public presentations in the real world. And you say, well, no, I'm going to be this, and you're not going to be this forever. You're going to want to move up in your job, and you might start as a nurse, but you're going to be a trainer eventually, or doing some other kind of public education, public health. So you're going to be giving presentations. But as far as the educated citizen of free society part, it's not just the job. Let's say that your children go to a certain school and they're going to end the music program and the orchestra, and your children have benefited, and your friends' children have benefited from this. It's important. What are you going to do? Just sit there? No, you're going to go to a meeting and, like a logical, rational person, give a presentation on why they can't do that. So That's the educated citizen in a free society point, part of it. So this is really the core. This is why we do what we do, because it's about more than just getting a job. It's about life. You've seen this before. Some of these things are, some refers to some ideas we've had in the past. Tucker's Law, and I'm very proud of Tucker's Law. I'm going to get calendars made out of it one of these days. But if someone can possibly find a way to misunderstand you, they will. In Corollary 1, this is multiplied in online communication, in online classes. What I'm getting at here is simply that um, as a public speaker, you have to predict possible barriers that could occur in the mix of the audience and you and this message and everything else. And in predicting, find ways to get around them. Could it be that they don't understand certain words you're going to use? So you're going to have to define words. Could it be that you have a lot of really difficult statistical information? Okay, how are you going to translate that to simple terms, to terms people can deal with? You may have what I call the elephant in the room situation, where everybody's thinking about X. You really want to talk about Y, but X is in the way. So what are you going to do about X if everybody's concerned about it? So public speaking is about predicting what could be a barrier and finding a way around it. It's problem solving. This you've seen before as well. Communication always involves a content and relationship dimension. And in public speaking, this is particularly important because we think of content as the data, the material, the concepts that you are communicating, the information. And that is, of course, important. But there's also this relationship dimension. And in public speaking, we call it credibility or ethos. And you might have heard that word in your English class or your speech class before. So ethos has to do with, does the audience trust you? Do they see you as trustworthy, honest, smart, competent, sincere, these kinds of things? So that's the relationship side of it, as well as the content side, and you have to have both. And it works the other way too, though. You have to have respect and trust in the audience. You can't just expect them to trust you without the mutual respect. Are you treating them like they're logical, intelligent people? Are you looking down on them? And that's where we get into ethical problems, because speakers do not see their audiences as the kind of people that they really are. They see them as less than. Public speaking requires muscle memory is referring to the fact that public speaking is an activity. It's a physical activity. And just like any sport, you have to practice and get used to what your body is doing, whether it's swinging a golf club or learning to snow ski, which I started to do when I was 44. Don't do this at home. Seriously. And, you have to do these things over and over again till your body knows how to respond. And public speaking is very much that way. It's about the posture. It's about using gestures. It's about who do you look at, when do you look at them, how long do you look at them. It's about walking around some, being comfortable in your own skin. You'll find that the best public speakers are obviously very comfortable. They're almost like actors, and I don't like to say that because it gives a wrong impression. And many actors are not good public speakers, but good public speakers have to be able to be comfortable in their skin and communicate that. So it does require a physical aspect of it, and that's why we'll talk later about the practice. Public speaking is a horrible way to download data into people's minds. And this is one problem that usually introverts tend to have more than other people, but are also people that are just very numbers oriented. They want to just use a speech to give lots and lots of information, and actually public speaking is not very good at that, because we're not good listeners anymore. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, people could listen to long, long speeches and remember good parts of it. But we just don't do that anymore. The message degrades very quickly in our memory. But it is a very good way to make that information meaningful. Less information, but make it meaningful through various techniques and supporting materials and uh, stories, humor, etc., that you can do to make it really meaningful to people, make them act upon it, make them see how it fits in their lives. So this is the big, going back to the content relationship idea. This is the big what's the word I'm thinking of? It's a big challenge because you don't want to give too much information. You want it to be meaningful. So that brings us to the concept less is more. Keep it simple. Now, you've probably heard the KISS acronym before, keep it simple, stupid, and we're not going to call anybody stupid here, but the concept is that you can't do too much in a speech. You have to be realistic about how much information you can give. This principle applies to the content, but mostly to organization, as I'm going to apply it here. The audiences require simple organization in their oral messages with fewer than 5 main points, with 5 or fewer, I should say, and strong transitional material. In your basic speech class, you should have learned things like spatial, chronological, cause-effect, etc. organization. That's really good. That applies here. You want to be sure that you don't have like 6, 7, 8 major points in your speech, Roman numerals. I'll just cross them out if you do that. But on top of that, along with a good, solid, simple organization for oral message, you need to have strong transitional material. And by that, of course, I mean introduction, preview, summary, conclusion, and then statements within the body of the speech where you're saying this is where we've been, this is where we're going, this is where what we've mentioned so far, this is the direction, emphasizing things of that sort, repetition, and that would be very important. This slide refers to humor, and humor is an interesting thing to talk about in public speaking, and people take issue with this subject, but with the way I phrase this, but from a public speaking standpoint, it's true. Your audience is the judge of what is funny. Now, unless you are speaking to the comedy catch at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night and everybody's drunk, not everything is funny. And there are some things that are not funny and some things that are. I was visiting family, and I was subjected to, last week, many episodes of The Family Guy. Not my cup of tea. Some of it was funny, and I laughed. Their parody of The Great Gatsby was hilarious, but most of it was crass and vulgar and totally inappropriate. Not funny to me. Okay, obviously some people think it's very funny. So, the audience gets to decide this. You want your humor to, first of all, be relevant. It needs to be prepared and practiced, not just thrown in there because you think of it at the last minute. That'll get you in trouble. Too much off-the-cuff humor can really hurt you. It needs to advance your point. It needs to be what I call gentle, and that's probably maybe not the best word, but it needs to be about basic human foibles. Situations we can all relate to, relatable humor. We've all had, and this is why I like funny stories, but we've all had the situation of being in a car and a song comes on that we really like and we start jamming to it, and we look over at the person sitting next to us at the light and they're just wondering what's going on, things like that. Basic human experiences that are fun. Witticisms, funny pictures, sometimes memes that you can get off the internet or from Facebook that people use can often be very funny. So humor can add a lot to your speech if it has its place and it's relevant. So in the same vein, though, story can be very powerful, and the stories don't have to be funny. They can be funny. stories can be true, they can be fictional. You should identify if they are true or fictional. Don't make a fictional story true and put yourself in it. Same thing, don't tell a joke and say it happened to you. People will call you on that and you'll look stupid. Um, Stories are your most powerful tool as a public speaker. I firmly believe that. And it's not that you're just going to tell one string of stories after another. That's not my point. But a powerful story at the end can be great. A good story to get attention, beginning. Maybe a story that you start at the beginning and end in the conclusion can be very good. That's a technique I've seen done well. Um, you know, I grew up in the age of the rest of the story and Paul Harvey, which he's not on the radio anymore, but he did that. He would tell a story, and then the sponsors would give a commercial, and they knew that people would come back, so they'd listen to the commercial. So story is your most powerful, so I encourage you to stories. This one sort of speaks for itself. Don't tell the audience what they already know. This is essentially the definition of boring. If you already know something, it's boring to hear it said again. The other aspect of boring is that if people see no personal relevance to it, which is we'll get to in a minute, but there should be value added. You should be telling them something new. Think of people that smoke. If you were to walk up to someone who smokes and said, "Did you know that that's going to give you lung cancer?" They've heard that, and it's not worked. So they need some information that's new to them that's going to work, because the old information isn't working. This is the value-added part. The most effective presentations are those that answer the questions in the minds of the audience. And you're like, what? But this is where we're saying, think in terms of what the audience wants to know, needs to know, is going to be benefited by. What about your presentation is going to make their life, work, relationships, pocketbook, careers, whatever, family better? That's the kind of questions they have in their mind. That WIIFM is not a radio station. That's what's in it for me, because that's what we're all asking. What's in it for me? Where does this relate to my life? And that's where the value added comes in. And as you approach your speech, don't just think about, okay, I've got information, I'm going to put this information, just share it, and there it is. Think about your audience, your people in your class. These are people who are going to be professionals. They're going to have to use communication. What do you want them to know that will make their professional lives better as communicators? That's the big question. That's the question you're trying to answer in the speech. And you don't have to articulate the question so much as you just have to answer it. This one you've probably heard before. I actually got a fortune cookie with this one, and it was kind of funny. I took a picture of them and I put them on Facebook. At that same dinner, my husband got one, and I don't remember if he got this one or I did, but the other one said, "If you're not the lead dog, the scenery never changes." Which is not exactly the same tone as this one, but people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it's a cliche, but it is true. It's just true. And you have to instill in your audience a sense of you have something valuable that can help them and that you want to help them in this information. Public speaking is a linear process, and that means that when you're listening to a speech, there is no redo button. There's no going backwards. Now you're reading. When you're reading, you can do that. I've taken statistics courses. I'm taking one online right now, and it's sort of like, okay, let me go back. Let me read that again, and let me read that again. Let me read that again till I get it. And I can do that. But in public speaking, there's no redo. There's no looping back. So what we call that is planned redundancy. That is necessary. Redundancy is repetition, and usually that's bad, but in public speaking, planned redundancy is necessary. You used to hear the phrase, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. It's kind of a silly expression, but it's true. You have previews, you have transition material, you have conclusions where you're reminding people this is planned redundancy. We do this not because it's just something to do. We do it because it reinforces main ideas and thoughts and the most important material in people's minds. You will have to do a PowerPoint for this presentation, and if you're one of those people that says, I'll do my PowerPoint and then I'll write my speech, no, don't do that. PowerPoint is the last thing you do. It is an aid. It is not the centerpiece. To the very point that if you get to a point where what you're talking about is not on the PowerPoint, you push the B key on the computer, or you use the clicker and turn it to a black slide, because you don't need the slide. So PowerPoint is there to help. It's to give visual support. It's to give bullet point ideas for emphasis. It is not to put a lot of information on the slide. I have done, in some of my past narrated PowerPoints, I've had too much information. This one has been better. You've noticed this is more along the line of what I want. It's got less information, one idea per slide. The only thing I could do perhaps is maybe put the content, the line of text in the middle of the slide. That could be done. It would be a little more balanced. But, it's not a lot of information. Speak from the overflow simply means that you know more than you possibly can say. There's an old saying or an old story, and it's probably not true, but that someone asked Michelangelo, how did he create the David sculpture? And he said, I just chipped away at everything that wasn't the David out of the marble. But the point was that he had a lot of marble to start with, and he found the form within it. And that's really what you do in a speech. You know much more than you can possibly say in the time that you have, but you're cutting away to meet your purpose of what you can say. Obviously, for example, in this, I could say a whole lot more about public speaking, but I have a certain purpose in this PowerPoint, and I don't want to have everything in it. That would be inappropriate. Consequently, you should make sure you know what you're talking about. Make sure you know the meanings of all the words and concepts you use and the pronunciation of them. And this can be very embarrassing if you don't do this. You say, well, of course everyone does this. No, they don't. If you don't know the pronunciation of a word, find out or don't use it. If you're even have a shade of concern that you don't know the meaning of a word, don't use it. Use a word, because if you don't know what it means, we probably don't know what it means. And nobody will be impressed by your use of a word that they don't understand. They will not be sitting there saying, ooh, that person's so smart. I wish I was smart like them. No, they will be sitting there saying, why can't that fool use words everybody understands? Okay? So, and I will tell this story that I've told many times. Back in the mid-90s, I was working at the tech school over in Lafayette, and the governor, Zellmiller, came to dedicate a building. Big deal. Okay, got to meet the governor. He was very nice that day. And a local politician who will remain nameless, but who was known for drinking a little too much, got up and said that Governor Zellmiller was the epitome of support for education. And it was sort of like, what is he talking about? Until we figured out he meant the epitome of support for education. So I will always remember that till I die, and tell that story, and it was actually I told it in class a couple years ago, and a student said, "Oh yes, my father was there. He was so mad that he said that." So I thought that was interesting. You cannot prepare and practice too much. Let me camp on this for a little bit. I really want to keep this to 30 minutes, but let me talk about the practice part. When I say practice, I mean physically practice. I don't mean sitting in your car going over the ideas in your head or lying on your bed. I mean dress rehearsal. You're dressed, you have shoes on, you're standing up, you're saying it out loud, and you do this multiple times. You have your PowerPoint, you have your visuals, etc. A few years ago, I had to give a presentation for the accreditation of the college, and it was a big deal. I mean, I did not want to mess this up, and I practiced and practiced because I wanted it to be slick and professional, and you just have to do that. So when I say practice, I mean practice. You will have to do a practice video, but by no means is that the only time you practice. That practice video is to let you know how long you're going, which is always interesting. They're usually not in a time limit. They are. It lets you see big problems, but you still have to practice more and more after that. So be prepared for practicing. Always respect time limits. If you are given 20 minutes to speak, you are not given 25 minutes. Never trespass on people's time limits. And if you're given 20 minutes, you should probably plan on taking 17 or 18 so that there's time for wiggle room and questions. Your speech starts the minute the audience can see you. This means that it the the way you're affecting people starts before you actually have words coming out of your mouth. The it has to do with whether you're on time. Do you get there early? Do you talk to people ahead of time? Are you set up? Are you ready to go? How do you walk to the front? Do you look like you're going to the guillotine, or you look like you're anxious to speak? Are you professional? These kinds of things. Do you chat the people up before the speech? And then how do you walk away? Do you look like you're saying to yourself, well, that sucked? Or are you saying, I'm finished, I'm done, I'm not still talking as I go to my seat? Things like that. This comes into the issue of credibility. There's beginning credibility, which everything before the speech, derived, what happens during the speech, which would be your content, organization, delivery, and use of sources and appeals, and then terminal, how credible. Are you more credible at the end than you were at the beginning? Obviously, you would want to be. This one obviously has to do with eye contact. Don't talk to anything except the audience, because in Western culture, connection through eye contact is everything. That's how we determine connection. And again, it is a muscle memory issue. You have to practice it. You have to look at people, usually about 5 seconds, then go to somebody else. Look at people all over the room, not just one area in the room, which is hard to do because we all have a tendency to look one way or another. And so that's a practice issue. And this is my last 20. Emulation is a sincere form of flattery and a good idea. You need to know the difference between emulation and imitation. I would never encourage you to imitate anybody, to mimic them, or to steal from them, but borrowing and emulating what they do well is a sincere form of flattery and a good idea. A few years ago, I had to observe another teacher, and that teacher was doing something as an activity in class, and I said, oh, what a great activity. I stole it. I borrowed it. And I told him that I was, and it worked out really well. It was the kind of thing I like to do in class. Now, not everything you see another speaker do is going to work for you, but you want to be sensitive to what other speakers do and say, I like how they did that. I like how they introduced. I like how they arranged their PowerPoint. I like how they used that story. I like how they moved around and emphasized things. There's various things you can pick up from other speakers and that you know are good, and incorporate them into your own repertoire, your bag of tricks, as they say, your tools. So those are TuckersTwenty, and this is designed to get you started thinking about how to put your own presentation together. This presentation is all told worth 40% of your grade, so you want to get it right. Some of that is the written part, the outline. Some of it is the video and the reflection, and 20% of the class is the actual presentation that you give on a certain day. Some of you need to respond to my doodle poll that I sent out earlier, so that we can get these lined up and when we're going to do these during final exam week. So I said I would keep this to 20 minutes, or 30 minutes rather, and I am just under that. So thank you very much.